number of plants you need and making sure that you've analyzed your polyculture design and made good lists to find out what functions you need for all the different levels, the layers of the forest garden. So, plant selection is to analyze, quantify, and assemble a list of plants fulfilling the various functions of local guilds and assess the strategy supporting the primary plants. The primary plants, most of the time, are going to be some kind of fruiting tree or shrub of the large nature. Those are the primary overstory or canopy plants that we were first picking as our major crop, and then the plants underneath to support it and also to partition the resources. The plant selection is the last stage of design. This is what we do after we've done our structure. We know the types of plants and where they're going to be placed and the number of plants that we need. We have a plant list that lists all the plants on the design by their type, and then we start to divide out those types of plants within different species of plants. And it's done after all the other considerations are completed and the structure is established, like I say. So plant selection is what we do after we've done our assessment, done our draft design, we've got all our plant types placed where they want to go, and then we start looking for plants. So the ecological functions, which we've talked about many times, are ecological services and ecological functions that plants provide. So we have quite a list here. The majority of the ones that we are going to be looking for are the nutrient accumulators, soil cultivators, soil builders, and then the nitrogen fixers. Nitrogen scavengers too, but that's basically in our fall season. If we have some harvest and we can put down a cover crop, we want to catch some of the nitrogen from decomposing plants and not have it escape from us, or from the, I should say, from the polyculture area through the rains or through the winter. So depending upon the function of the plants and in their position and what they're doing, we've already decided their type, and then what their functions are, then we can go look for those plants. We may need some plants that are erosion control in some areas, maybe some perennials or ground cover and trees. There are plants that have that. We might be looking for plants that are soil cultivators that need to break up the soil, and we can click on that too. And we're going to go to the plant database and look at some of those. After we have our ecological functions, then we're looking for our human uses. And although these may be a priority with many of our designs, especially when we have our canopy trees and our overstory crops, we do want to pick out those first, and they may have an ecological function or not. They obviously will have some kind of service that they'll provide to the plants underneath and then also to us. But if we can find understory plants and shrubs, ground covers that also have a human use in addition to the function that they're providing, that's all the better for us also, something that we can harvest. Hopefully we have harvestable plants so that we can meet our human needs also at the same time. So there's a difference between plant guilds and polycultures, and I may have explained that earlier. But plant guilds are plants that are put in position basically because of their shape and partitioning the resources. Like in this polyculture berry patch, we have blueberry, lingonberry, and bunchberry. The blueberries are basically the overstory. They're the largest plant. The lingonberries coming in below that, and then the bunchberries as a ground cover. This is a plant guild. Really, they're just covering the soil. They're working together and bringing in some diversity and open air space. We have good air drainage around all the plants, but also a diversity of harvest. There's not a lot of ecological functions being shared here. There's no mechanisms of facilitation other than from just by occupying the space and some benefits of not having the bare soil. So we want to diagram on our designs the human food that is in our design and then the mutual support that is within the polyculture itself. So ecological functions are used to build the guilds and to build the polycultures. This is one example of a honeycrisp tree polyculture, and you can see in the lower right here the number of plants that are in there. And these plants are based after we put in the tree. So we've already decided we want to have fruit trees. In this case, we have a honeycrisp. And you can see on the left and the right on the bottom there are other trees also that are planted. We're not planting these trees in isolation. But as an example of the polyculture for this tree, we have 4 other plants that are growing with it. And it's not limited to 4, it can be many more, and also could be a higher quantity of plants also. So alpine strawberry, a plant that we have as an understory. This is a mulch maker. There's 10 alpine strawberries there. Those are number 2. And you can see that they're basically around the canopy when the tree is young. They're building mulch and basically building the soil and mulching around the tree as it's younger. As the tree grows out farther and that shade, that canopy comes over the top, and these grow into shade, these most likely will move out to another space, can be transplanted, or they're basically going to just die out, and the succession of other plants are going to come in here. But we have alpine strawberry as a mulch maker, and also there's a harvest there of the strawberries themselves. Number 3 is a wild blue indigo, and these are, this is white wild indigo, but blue is usually what we use. There's many different indigos, and that's a nitrogen fixer. It's a perennial. And here we have one that's right by the tree when it was planted, and another one out in the canopy. And the strategy behind having these nitrogen fixers staggered, and we could actually have maybe a couple more out here, is the fact that we have one that's going to establish itself right along with the tree when that root ball goes into the ground. Not far from it is going to be a nitrogen fixer, and that nitrogen fixer is going to grow and supply nitrogen to the tree through probably quite a bit of its life, and it can take dappled shade and be fine, and it actually goes quite big because you can see that from the dotted line. The indigos can get 4 feet across, and they'll fill that space. Plus they have the beneficial insect functions. They fix nitrogen, and they also have early nectary, or I should say early summer nectary for butterflies and bees and such. And then they actually look pretty also. They also have great cut flower. So we have 2 of these in here, and the second one is out on the outer edge because as the tree grows and sends its roots out, eventually it'll get out to this side, and that indigo will have a time to establish itself and also have roots in the ground and the ability to build up nitrogen in the soil as it grows and as it dies back each winter. The white wild indigo and blue indigo, they actually die right to the ground each year and then come up kind of like asparagus out of the ground. Little spikes come out of the ground and then come straight out, and then they blossom and grow quite wide. Very pretty plant. The daffodils, which are number 4 around this, their ecological function is as a pest confuser. Basically, the daffodil has an exudate in its roots in this plant that is not noxious to rodents, but it kind of keeps rodents away. They don't like the smell, and so we put daffodil around the tree to keep rodents from girdling or eating the bark or at the base of the tree in the wintertime. And if you plant this around the tree and close into the trunk, in the wintertime when the mice are going around, they'll smell this, they'll sense it in the soil and coming up, and they will turn around. Actually, it works very well to protect the tree from rodents. Rabbits may be another thing, but it's really on these smaller trees, the mice that get in there and do a lot of girdling and do a lot of damage on that tree. Still advise having a tree tube around it or wrap the tree to protect the bark also, but eventually that may wear away, or an additional benefit is to have these daffodils around it. And again, it's a nice cut flower. It's the first thing that comes up in the spring. It adds organic material. It's a pollinator, and so the beneficial ecological benefits from daffodil is much like the wild indigo and the strawberry. All of these are feeding our insects, our beneficial insects. And then number 5 on here, you can see a number of these, and this is comfrey, and comfrey is a dynamic accumulator. And again, planting this underneath the canopy of the tree, spread out. It's collecting nutrients from the ground, collecting in its leaves. It has a very, very long taproot. It's a long-lived plant, and it does like to spread, but we take this and about 3 or 4 times a summer, just take a machete and chop it right to the ground and spread those leaves underneath the tree as green manure. And the nutrients and minerals in those leaves will go into the ground as the leaves decompose and then release those nutrients and minerals to the roots of the apple tree and the other plants too. So we're basically mining those nutrients deep with the taproot of the comfrey and bringing it in. So those are the ecological functions of this polyculture. Very simple. You can see the way they're spread out. It's not symmetrical. We're trying to be rather curvilinear with our shapes and how we put things in. We still need access to the tree, which we have. Some of these plants don't mind being bumped a little bit. We don't want to step on them a lot. Anywhere else that you see blank area is a possible space for other perennials or expansion of these plants that we already have. Either way, it will have to be either mulched or it will have to be planted. And of course, I would prefer planting. The whole area under and almost slightly outside the canopy should be planted so that we really fill in that apron around the tree. This is an American grape polyculture in a vineyard, and there's a lot of different plants going on here because this is a little bit working in succession. So we have the fence line on the left side, the northwest side, you might say upper left side of the access path. And that access path is a swale that's collecting water. It's on contour, but it's a way that we're also getting around in this small vineyard area. And we have the American grape. That's the #1 circles all along the trellis there. We don't know what kind of trellis that is, but it's an American grape on the trellis. #2 is hyssop. Again, a great pollinator plant, a great nectary plant. And actually, anise hyssop is a really tasty plant too for the herbs or for tea, but also it feeds parasitic wasps, and it has menthol that helps bees rid themselves of parasitic mites, at least in the outside. So hyssop is a great plant to help our pollinators. It's a beneficial insect plant. Annual pole beans and annual peas, #3 and #4, are basically just covering the soil and going up the trellis to fill that space before the grapes have grown into that. So we're just using that as a ground cover, even though they're annuals, just a ground cover, and that will be temporary as these grapes kind of start to fill in. And within a year or two, actually probably a couple or 3 years, that will stop as the grapes kind of take over the trellis area. But as much as possible, we want to fill the space with production and cover the soil and use it to our best benefit, but also keep it ecologically alive, and a lot of that material also, especially the legumes, that we returned to the soil. Blackberries, #5. Those are also large trellis plants on the other side. We're kind of keeping that out on the other side along with the comfrey. In our orchard area, in this vineyard area, we're keeping comfrey away from the grapes because of their rather large nature and the fact that they may spread and might compete a little bit with the grape roots as the grapes are kind of going down and looking for their material. So the comfrey on the other side, in this case on the other side of the path, and then 6 of them are here, and or #6, excuse me, and there's 10 comfrey on there, all spread out, and those would be cut down. Kind of you can see it's a very dense mass of plants. That's why there's just a #6 in that long string of, it's a mass planting area. And that comfrey will be cut and chopped and thrown underneath the grapes for green manure. And finally, we have a very small salad garden polyculture, but it still has quite a few plants in it. This is working with polycultures, working with ecological functions, but within an annual garden. And this annual garden, great, I keep getting these things on the screen, has tomatoes, but you can see how they're spread out. We're not grouping things together. We have basil around the tomato, and it said that basil actually helps with the flavor of tomato, and it's a nutrient, not a nutrient accumulator, but it is an herb, and they do accumulate nutrients, but it also has a smell to it, and it's an insect confuser, a pest confuser. Borage and collards, leaf plants, you can see how those are spread out. So next to the tomato was the basil, and then 3 in between the basil and the other basil. We'll put some borage in there. 4 are the collards, and you can see how they're spread off right and left on the other side. 5 is kale spread in. I would probably add chard in here too, like that a lot. Peppers and nasturtiums. And so all the things that we can get out for salsa, or zalza, or however you might call it, can come out of this garden, and we can plant this garden as a polyculture. It's another opportunity to do this. And the ecological functions that are included in these plants, they have multiple fungicides. The I believe the tomato has one, and borage has another. Insecticides within the plants itself, within the nasturtiums, and inside the perennial aisle, there's also insectary plants in there, beneficial insects. So as much as we have insecticides, we have insect repellents with the nutrient, with the insect confusers, the pest confusers. And we have a beneficial insectary. So we're bringing in the predators. We're bringing in our own pest predators to help deal with them on the plant. Plus we add stress to the insects by spreading out their target plants, the ones that they prefer. And then lastly on here is a flavor enhancer, and that's what the basil does for the tomato. But you can see how it's spread out. You kind of see the pattern of these last three designs, how things are going. We want them slightly random, still accessible, but we're not grouping everything together in large groups. We're kind of spreading them out across the area that we're planting. So the permaculture design sequence that we've gone through so far is we've done our niche analysis. We've looked at the space, the planting space, and the sector map, the climate and the weather and the resources that we have there. We've done some soil testing or investigation with digging some holes, checking out the soil type, what we're using, and then decided what our resource allocation is going to be on this property. How are we going to use the property? How are we going to divide it up? And also how are we going to get around it? The next thing we did was a native plant inventory. What are the plants that are already growing here? Of course, in an annual garden, that's not something that might apply, but if we're doing a forest garden in a woodland area, we can see what plants are already there and use those for analogs, looking at those family of plants and see if there are any that we can plant that are edible and used for us. So the ecological analogs are selected. And then we start building our plant selection list. Again, that's the last thing we do. We're looking for our primary and anchor plants. Once we pick out those, the larger canopy plants, overstory plants, then our facilitation plants, those that have the ecological functions. Those will be the companion plants for the others, and building our 7-layer forest garden. So we've kind of going through this design sequence, and now we're at the point of picking out our plants. So the niche defines the plants. Where we are going to put our species of plants defines the plants that we actually will put there. The plants supply the ecological and human uses, so we want to make sure as we get the plants that are defined by the niche that they have ecological uses and services that they can provide to the other plants and build the natural capital, build the fertility in the soil. The uses achieve the design goals. We have design goals in line for what we want to do with the area that we're planting, whether it's going to be food or it's going to be restoration of the property, and making sure that we have our goals met. So the niche is defined by the plants supply the ecological and human uses, and the uses achieve the design goals. That is the process, that is the line that we're going. We have to decide what our goals are, and then we have to find out what the niche will provide or what plants are allowed, and it's that in-between part, using the plants to provide the goals, the ecological and human uses to achieve our goals. It's important. Limiting factors as design drivers. If there are things that are working against us, well, we just have to change our attitude a little bit and know that those are design drivers. We need to use that. The soil type, the wetness, the dryness, whatever the issue is on the property, limits by owners or limits by easements and things, use those as design drivers to help us design still a space and use those limiting factors as catapults to do better design. Ecological functions provide the solutions. If there's an issue on the property, let's look for an ecological function in the plants to help solve that. A limiting factor might be dry soil. The design driver is improved soil moisture. We need plants to improve the soil moisture or the structure of our design to do that. If we have a steep slope, if that's our limiting factor, we need soil stabilization. What fibrous root plants can we put there? How can we start building up the stability of that area? If we have minimal time to work on this design or the people that own the space, then we need something that's low maintenance. Obviously, plants are not going to be invasive, they're not going to spread, and also hardy. So low maintenance plants might be things that would be necessary in that area. We have low soil organic matter. We need soil building plants. We need plants that grow quickly, plants that grow a lot of material and can either be cut or composted to build up that soil organic matter quickly, or more quickly than it would be otherwise. And if we have a limiting factor of wind and what kind of trees we can put in, we can develop wind breaks. Now we have a design driver. We have wind breaks and make those wind breaks plants that either we can harvest or we can use for material later on. And then what do we have? We have a forest edge that we can build around. As soon as we have trees on the property, we have an area that we can work with and start building our 7 layers down to the ground of productive plants. So from niche analysis to the design process, we're working on our base maps, getting our hardscapes and our permanent structures in, worked on our bubble maps, loose lines, get our uses, our access, and our goals on the bubble map, and then transfer those to the concept plan. That's where we really refine those spaces. Hard lines denote transitions from planting areas. Hardscapes are defined. Production areas and polyculture patches are outlined and positioned. The concept plan, we're getting really close now to our final design. We're taking those bubble maps and those loose spaces and we're tightening them up around the property. The first draft, we work with our guilds. The purpose of the plant width and dimension relationships are defined. The first draft is just getting those plants on there, just like with the concept plan, getting our plants on there by type, their width and their dimension and the space that they're going to occupy. And then the next draft section, we'll start picking the plants in and put them in by species and label their positions and define their shapes. We can even change their symbols a little bit to define what type of plant they are as far as conifers or deciduous plants. And then the completed design encompasses all the details, rendering, and relationships in any notes. The completed design has your final notes on the design so you can remember and other people looking at it can remember certain details that need to be remembered either from implementation or when purchasing the materials for it. That's it for this last presentation, and I'll see you at the next one or see you in class.